It's a quiet Tuesday night in Perth. A young tradie is walking home from his mate's place. Nothing unusual. No crime scene, no warning. Then, red and blue lights flash behind him. An unmarked patrol car slows to a crawl. Two officers step out. "Mate, we need to see some ID." He pauses. He's done nothing wrong. But in Australia, that single sentence can change everything. Because what happens next depends on three words most people have never heard. Words that could mean the difference between walking home or spending the night in a holding cell. This isn't a movie script. This has happened to real people on real streets in every state of the country. Tonight, we're breaking down exactly what your rights are when police ask for ID, what you're legally required to do, what you're not, and the three words that lawyers say can protect you if you use them the right way. Stay till the end, because what you don't know here could cost you your freedom. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand something most Aussies never think about. There is no single national law about ID. Every state runs its own rulebook. WA, NSW, Victoria, Queensland, each one different. And that gap, that confusion, is exactly where things go wrong. Our tradie, let's call him Josh because that's not his real name, grew up thinking the rule was simple. If a copper asks, you hand it over. That's what his old man told him. That's what most people believe. But belief isn't law. And that night, standing under a flickering streetlight, Josh was about to learn the difference the hard way. The officer's tone was calm, almost too calm. "We've had reports of a break-in nearby. Can I get your name and ID, please?" Josh reached for his wallet. Instinct. Compliance. The default setting most of us are wired with. But then something made him pause. A memory. A video he'd watched months earlier about reasonable suspicion. He looked up. "Can I ask, what's the reason you're stopping me?" The officer's expression shifted, just slightly, like he wasn't expecting the question. In Western Australia, police don't have unlimited power to demand ID from anyone, anytime. There has to be a reason, a suspicion of an offence, a driving-related matter, a specific legal trigger. Without one of those, legally, you may not be required to comply. But here's the catch. Most people don't know that. And most people, faced with two officers in the dark, don't feel like arguing legal technicalities. Josh didn't either. Not at first. "I asked because I haven't done anything," he said. The second officer stepped closer. "We just need to confirm who you are, mate. Won't take long." It sounded reasonable, friendly even. But underneath that friendliness was pressure. The kind of pressure that makes ordinary people hand over information they're not legally obligated to give. This is where things get uncomfortable, because across Australia there have been documented cases, reported by legal aid services and civil rights groups, of people detained, fined or arrested after refusing ID checks that were, on paper, not lawful requests. Not because they broke the law, but because they didn't know how to respond without escalating the situation. Josh didn't know this yet. All he knew was his heart was pounding, and that the next words out of his mouth were about to matter more than he realised. He took a breath, and he said three words he barely understood the weight of. "Am I detained?" Silence. The officer's radio crackled somewhere in the background. Neither of them answered right away. And that silence, that pause, was the moment everything changed. The silence stretched longer than it should have. 3 seconds, maybe 4. But when you're standing on a dark footpath with two officers in front of you, 4 seconds feels like an eternity. Josh's question hung in the air. "Am I detained?" It's a simple phrase, but legally it's a loaded one. Because under Australian law, there's a critical difference between a voluntary conversation and a lawful detention. If you're not detained, you're generally free to walk away. If you are detained, different rules apply, and the officer is required, in most states, to tell you why. The first officer finally spoke. "No, you're not detained. We're just having a chat." But here's the twist most people never see coming. If you're not detained and you're not under arrest, then technically you don't have to stay. Josh knew this much from the video he'd watched, but knowing something in theory and living it in real time are two very different things. His legs felt heavy. Every instinct in his body told him to just stay put. Stay polite, don't make waves. That instinct is exactly what officers are trained to expect. Compliance through discomfort. Not because it's malicious, but because it's human nature. Most people cave under social pressure, not legal authority. Josh cleared his throat. "If I'm not detained, then I'd like to head home." The second officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "We can make this easy, or we can make this difficult. Your call." That line, that exact phrasing, it's one that's shown up in complaint reports lodged with police oversight bodies in more than one state. A phrase that sits in a grey area. Not quite a threat, but not quite reassurance either. Josh's pulse spiked. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He just wanted to go home. But now he was standing at a crossroads that thousands of Australians have stood at before him, usually without cameras, without witnesses, and without anyone believing their side of the story afterward. He glanced past the officers. A single security camera blinked on a shopfront across the street. Small, easy to miss, but it was there, recording. And that detail, one Josh hadn't even thought about until that exact second, was about to become the most important piece of the entire night. Because what happened in the next 90 seconds would end up being reviewed months later by people who had no idea this ordinary Tuesday night would ever matter to anyone. The officer took a step forward. "Last chance, mate. ID, or we're taking this further." Josh's mouth went dry, and in that moment, he had to decide. Comply, even though he believed he had no legal obligation to, or hold his ground and risk what further actually meant. Josh's mind raced through everything he thought he knew, half-remembered facts, fragments of legal videos watched late at night, the kind you forget until you desperately need them. He knew refusing outright could look like obstruction. He knew complying could mean giving up ground he might never get back. So he did something in between, something calmer than either option. "I'm happy to cooperate," Josh said slowly. "But I want to understand, under what power are you requesting this?" It wasn't defiance, it was a question. And in Australian law, that question matters more than people realise. Because officers are generally required to be able to point to a specific legal power when demanding identification outside of driving-related stops. Not a feeling, not a hunch, an actual citable reason. The first officer hesitated, just for a second. Then he said it. "Look, we had a report matching your description near a break-in on Thackeray Street." Josh blinked. "A break-in? I literally just left my mate's house 10 minutes ago." "That's what we're trying to confirm," the second officer replied. Here's where the story takes its first real turn. Because later, weeks later, when Josh filed a formal request for the incident report, something didn't add up. There was no matching call-out logged for that street at that time. No incident number, no record of a break-in report matching the description given. Just a routine patrol. Now, to be fair, mistakes happen. Reports get miscommunicated, radio chatter gets crossed. This isn't necessarily proof of misconduct, but it raises an uncomfortable question that plays out across Australia more often than most people realise. How often are reasonable suspicion stops based on something real? And how often are they based on nothing more than presence, timing, or appearance? Back on the footpath, Josh didn't know any of this yet. All he had was a gut feeling that something about the explanation felt thin. But gut feelings don't hold up in an argument with two officers at night. So he made his decision. "I'll give you my name," he said carefully, "but I want it noted that I'm doing so without accepting this as a lawful direction." The officers exchanged a glance. It wasn't anger, it was surprise, because most people don't talk like that. Most people either comply instantly or panic and refuse everything, making the situation worse. Josh had landed somewhere in between. Calm, clear, documented, almost like he knew this moment might be scrutinised later. He gave his name. Nothing else. No date of birth, no address, no explanation of where he'd been or why. And that distinction, name only, nothing more, is something legal advocates say most Australians don't realise they're allowed to do in many situations. The officer wrote it down, radioed it through. And for a moment, everything went quiet again. Then the radio crackled back, and the officer's face changed. Not relief, not embarrassment, something else, something closer to concern. "Copy that," he said into the radio, eyes flicking toward Josh. Josh felt his stomach drop, because whatever just came through that radio, it wasn't what anyone standing on that footpath was expecting. The officer lowered the radio slowly. His partner leaned in, waiting. "There's a flag on that name," the officer said quietly. Josh froze. A flag? What does that even mean? Neither officer answered right away, and in that silence, Josh's mind went to the worst possible places. Mistaken identity, a clerical error somewhere in a database he'd never see, or something far more unsettling, a system that had confused him with someone else entirely. This is a detail that rarely makes headlines, but legal aid groups across Australia have flagged it for years. Police databases aren't perfect. Names get duplicated, records get merged incorrectly. People with common names have been stopped, questioned, even detained because of information tied to someone else who happens to share their details. It's rare, but it happens. And when it happens to you, on a dark street, at night, with two officers standing over you, rare doesn't matter. "You're going to need to come with us to clarify this," the first officer said. Josh's heart slammed against his ribs. "Clarify what? I haven't done anything." "It's just a formality," the second officer said. "Won't take long." But Josh remembered something else from that legal video, something that suddenly felt more important than anything else that night. The difference between helping police with an inquiry and being formally detained under a specific power. Because one of those requires them to caution you, to tell you clearly what's happening and why. The other is just pressure, dressed up as cooperation. Josh's voice shook slightly, but he held his ground. "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Then am I being detained under a specific section? Because if I'm not, I have the right to refuse and go home." The words came out faster than he expected, sharper too. Not aggressive, but firm. The kind of firm that comes from fear turning into resolve. The two officers looked at each other again. Longer this time. Because Josh wasn't reacting like someone hiding something. He was reacting like someone who understood exactly where the legal line sat and wasn't going to cross it out of fear. That's rare, and it changes how these situations unfold. Finally, the first officer sighed. "Look, we'll run it through properly at the station. It's cleaner that way." "Cleaner for who?" Josh asked. No answer. Just the hum of the street light above them. Josh glanced again at the little security camera blinking across the road. Still recording, still watching. And for the first time that night, he felt like it might be the only thing standing between him and a night he wouldn't be able to prove ever happened the way he said it did. Then the second officer said something that changed the entire tone of the encounter. Something that suggested this flag on Josh's name wasn't a database glitch at all. This isn't the first call we've had about someone matching your details tonight. Josh's blood ran cold, because if that was true, someone, somewhere, was either impersonating him or something far stranger was going on. Josh stood there, replaying the sentence in his head. Not the first call about someone matching your details tonight. For a second, his imagination ran wild. Was someone using his name? Had his wallet been compromised without him even knowing? He hadn't lost anything. He hadn't reported anything missing. But the officer's words made it clear somebody, somewhere, had triggered this exact same flag earlier that evening. Can you tell me what the other call was about? Josh paused, then almost reluctantly gave him just enough. A report near the same area. Similar description. Similar clothing. Josh's stomach turned, not because he was scared of being blamed, but because it meant someone out there, a stranger, looked enough like him, dressed enough like him, to get mistaken for him twice in one night. It's an unsettling thought, but it's also more common than most people assume. Mistaken identity cases pop up in police reports across Australia every year. Vague descriptions, dim lighting, similar clothing, and an honest mix-up that spirals into something much bigger for the person caught in the middle. The officers ran his name through the system one more time. Properly this time. Cross-checked against the earlier call. Different date of birth. Different address. Different person entirely. Just a coincidence of description, timing, and bad luck. The tension in the officer's shoulders finally eased. "All right," he said, "you're free to go." No apology, no explanation beyond that. Just those 4 words, the ones Josh had been waiting almost 20 minutes to hear. He didn't argue. He didn't gloat. He just nodded, turned, and walked home. But that night stayed with him. Not because he did anything wrong, but because it showed him how quickly an ordinary walk home can turn into something that tests everything you think you know about your own rights. Here's what Josh learned, and what legal experts across Australia consistently point out. Police can request your name and address in specific, defined circumstances, not just because they feel like it. You are generally allowed to ask why you're being stopped, and you are allowed to ask the single question that changes the entire dynamic of an encounter. Am I detained? If the answer is no, you are, in most circumstances, free to leave. If the answer is yes, they are required to tell you the legal power they're using. Those 3 words aren't about being difficult. They're not about disrespecting police, who have a genuinely difficult job protecting communities every single day. They're about knowing where the line sits, so you can protect yourself calmly, clearly, and without fear. Josh's story isn't about a dramatic arrest. It's not about corruption or conspiracy. It's about something far more relatable. An ordinary person on an ordinary night, caught in a moment where knowledge made all the difference. Because in situations like this, panic makes things worse. Silence makes things worse. But calm, informed questions, they can change everything. So the next time you're asked for ID by police in Australia, remember Josh. Remember the streetlight. Remember the silence after those 3 words. And remember, knowing your rights isn't about fear. It's about walking home safely, with your dignity and your freedom intact. If this story hit home, make sure you understand your own state's laws, because they're not all the same. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next one.